All right. First off, I apologize that this is not VS Code, and because I know I'm going to hear about that at work on Monday. So it just works for me. So leave me alone. So this is the Office 365 install script. In its current form is 601 lines. I could probably trim it down to an even 600. There we go. Make it, because the ADD in me wants a 600. And so this script I try to keep updated on my GitHub. I'm pretty good about it because we don't have a good way of getting content between our lab at Big Bank and our stuff at home. So I've been trying to keep GitHub updated from my personal lab so I can grab stuff at Big Bank and update there. I try to keep notes as to how it's used. So I've got a bunch of examples, and I have updated it to use some of the new channel names. Not this one apparently, so I'll have to go back. They made that change announced this past week, and it's caused a little bit of extra work trying to keep this updated, and then to find out that after I updated it, something's broke. So I've had to kind of revert a few things. So
It looks like Gary's muted.
Yeah, sorry, Gary.
I'm sorry.
All better. I did it. It's all you. It's all me. It's all yours now.
All right. Well, I'll start back over then.
It was just like the last minute. I tried to kill the vacuum and got you too.
All right. Anyway, so I've got a change log that I try to keep updated. Well, I do keep updated. I don't try. I make sure I do because it benefits me as well. I keep anytime I make a change, I go in here. So even like on days where I make several changes, you'll see the date stamped the same, and then what I've added. I do this because it makes it easier for me to know which version or which release I'm using, because I'm trying to keep 4 or 5 different environments all in sync, and unless I have an easy way to keep that anyway, so I keep this updated. Anytime I make a change, I go in. So like today I actually added some code to accommodate the channel. So like right now in the install program line, if I put in semi-annual, the script actually changes it back to broad for me, so I don't have to. So we have several parameters that we allow during for the actual install. The pre-cache is used for both the content and the different language versions. So when we specify -precache, it only runs specific parts of the script, which will then copy the content. Otherwise, it will assume the content's already there and use what's in the cache. The other, we have switches for all the different add-ons that we're allowing. So by default, we are not having access as part of the installs for the average person who installs Office in our organization. If they want access, that's a separate install. So we have an access. We have Project Pro, Visio Pro, Project Standard, and Visio Standard. So as on the command line, when those are specified, those will get triggered to be added to the XML. And then we have the different channels. So while we're not actually going to be using all of them, I've added them to the script as potential things that you can feed into the script. So right now, monthly enterprise was basically the new thing that they added. Semi-annual preview was targeted, and semi-annual was broad, and that then gets fed into the channel parameter. Some different languages that I'm assuming I'm going to have to support based upon what Windows versions are out in our environment. So I've added these, but so if you have additional languages, you can easily add those to this, or you can just remove the this validation set and pass in whatever you want. And then yesterday I also added the set language default to make sure that it's actually setting it as the default. The company value came up a couple weeks ago when I was deploying stuff at Wells, at Big Bank, and accidentally had Garytown in the name because I was working on stuff after hours, which I often do for this, and I had copied it from my home lab to where I work and deployed a machine with that. And thankfully it's just a test machine, but it's like, okay, I'm just going to parameterize that too, so that doesn't happen. And then I wanted to actually, for testing purposes, just create the XML so far I can test to see that instead of having to run it through and actually do all the other steps, I just want to see what's going to happen when it builds the XML. So I added a command line so you can actually just run the script with a dash build config XML, and it will pop out the XML file to that folder, so that I can go through and confirm that I'm actually getting the output that I want. Down here, the source, this is where we are actually staging all of our content, program data, Office 365 cache. And as Mike alluded to, we're not making copies, so there's not duplicates. It's just hard links from the CCM cache. And that way it keeps the content smaller, but it allows it to all then be in one single place for the installer to look versus having to go to different places in the CCM cache to find what it needs. Registry path, this is actually not used in our deployment itself, but is used for additional items when we do our toast notifications, which Mike will get into later. And then I set a script version, so then I can look at a machine in the log and see if it's running the latest script or not. Let's see. So we have a whole lot of different stuff for if it's running pre-crash or not pre-crash. We had to do detection. So as Mike was saying, one of the requirements that we were given is that we have to see what is on the machine during the upgrade and then put back on what was there before. So if they had Access installed before, we needed to put it back on. If they had Visio Standard or Visio Pro, we had to put that back on, and same with the project suite. So we actually do detections. We check to see if any of those are installed, and then if they are, those get fed into a variable. We also have different, if Office 365 is already detected on the machine, we go into a totally different flow of what's going to happen in the script. Typically, the only reason that we'd be running this is if Office 365 is installed and then they want to add a product like Visio or Access or Project, or if we wanted to change the channel. So we accommodate those different things as well in this. So for instance, if the machine is running on semi-annual or broad channel and it's detected that it's running 365 already, and if the program line specifies like enterprise monthly, but yet the machine is running like semi-annual, it will detect that there's a variance there and make the change and set the machine now to the monthly channel instead of what was on there before. 1 second while I close my door. Working from home has benefits, but there's also additional distractions. And I've got 6 little distractions here at home that like to pop in from time to time. Okay, so in this section here, I've actually mapped out, when you install Office, it creates different registry keys, which I will be happy to show you. Let's see, let's go to my French machine. Okay, so the registry for this is easy to find. It's Microsoft and then Office. And then it goes into the click to run and then configuration. And this is what tracks the configuration for your click to run Office install. So here it's got the CDN base URL and the channel, and this will reflect which channel. I've looked at it enough to know that 3114 is the semi-annual channel. And so and that is our detection method on most of our different installs. It actually comes and looks at the CDN and checks the registry key. So that's how then I can detect in the script which channel is actually running currently. So I can compare what you're pushing through the command line and what's actually installed to see if it needs to change it or leave it alone. So if you're, the way I've written our installer is if you're doing an add-on product, like Visio or Project or Access, it's going to ignore whatever you put in your command line and then go out and look to see what channel you're already on. And it's just going to match the channel that you're already on. We don't want to have people switching channels by just installing Project. And I didn't want to have to set up I didn't want to have to set up a project for monthly enterprise, for semi-annual and semi-annual preview. I just wanted to set up one project and then have it go look what the channel was and then apply that channel. The only time that this comes into effect is if you already have a Office installed and then you go in and want to install Office monthly or Office preview. It will then go in and just override the channel that you have. So there's a lot of logging around this, and I can run a demo in a little bit to show you how quick this actually works. So, and then if we do change the channel, basically I trigger it in hardware inventory so that config manager knows that this machine is now on a different channel. And then I trigger the update scan and evaluation so that it sees that, oh, it needs an update to pull down the latest bits from the SUP to patch it to the other channel. You guys hanging in there? Doing okay? There's a lot to the script, and it can be eye-wearing. If I'm not monitoring the chat, but so Greg or Mike, feel free to pop in if anyone has a question or something too about what's going on.
Okay, will do.
All right. So the pre-cache, the content ones, the section of the script is pretty short, and I try to put a lot of notes into the script. So if you look at it, you'll see exactly what's going on. And if you ever see like write outs or write errors, I can probably come back through and delete these. But as we're building it and we're running it manually, it's more for debugging than anything. But eventually then we use this write cm trace log function, which I stole from Ryan F. Graves' blog. And I use that in pretty much everything I build to keep track of what's going on. And that will write out to that log file that I showed earlier. The pre-cache, it goes through, creates that O365 cache directory if it's not there. If this is a just Office install and it's using the base install and not like a language, it will clear out what's there first and then re-hard link from the cache to make sure that you're using the latest bits that have been downloaded. Or if it's a language, all it does is append to whatever's there. So if it detected that this is like the French language, it will go through and just copy, or not copy, it will hard link from the CCM cache into our Office 365 cache. And then we'd have it come through and just clean up a couple of files that we don't actually need in that location that are part of the content source. Now this part here is probably what will look familiar if you're using regular XML files. What I did to develop this was I first created an XML file from config.office.com that had 95% of what we needed. And then I took and pared that down to just the base essential that will be installed on every machine and threw that into an XML variable. So this here snip itself would basically install Office ProPlus without Teams, without OneDrive, and then a few select properties. If you were to copy this into an XML format and run it against the setup engine. So this is a fully working XML file just embedded in the script. And then what we do is we come along and we update the channel to whatever channel was specified in the program line. And right now I added this code so that if it's the program line is semi-annual or semi-annual preview, it's still using the old names so that the setup engine, until they release the new one next month, will actually know what to do. Otherwise, it does some funny things if you feed it a channel that it doesn't know what to do with. So then using the set attribute feature, I'm just taking and changing this channel to whatever's in that variable. And then as always, I like the log so that you know exactly what's happening. And then doing the same thing with the company value that you fed in. It's going to go here and replace your company here with whatever's in this variable. Down here is where if you were installing Access, it would go ahead and, well, in this case, as you can see, I don't have Access excluded by default. So what we're doing is we're actually adding the exclude of Access into that segment when we run it, unless in that program line you do a -access. If you do a -access, it won't add this in. So this is because it's an exclude app versus an add app in the XML. It works the opposite as the rest of these. So then for the rest of these, like Project Pro, Visio, and so on and so forth, they're all add items instead of remove items. So in the XML, we had to create another product, and then we had to add information about the product, add the key. And now this is just the Mac key. When I first posted this script online, someone's like, hey, or not the Mac, this is the KMS key. Someone was like, hey, you're putting your keys online. I'm like, no, this is the same key that when you generate the config file from Microsoft, this is the key that they provide so that you can activate through their KMS licensing. And then it goes and appends the different attributes into that section of the XML. And then we do the same thing for Visio or project, depending on if you called that in your command line, it appends this into the XML before it builds. Now, one of the things that we found is, let's say you had Visio Standard and you wanted to upgrade to Visio Pro. If you ran this, it would just add Visio Pro on top of Standard. So if you went to add remove programs, you'd see Office, you'd see Visio Standard and Visio Pro. So what I ended up having to do was add a remove into the XML so that it would then remove. So if you're installing Standard, we had to account for both scenarios. It would actually go ahead and then remove Project Pro from the system. So all that XML had to be accounted for as well during this process. And then what I added yesterday was all the language XML. So then to have to account for both adding or setting it as the default, the language, depending on if you want the default, you have to have that first. Whereas if you just want it as an additional, you can just append it to the end. So to be able to account for setting it as the default, I had to make it overwrite the ENUS that was there by default, and then append ENUS at the end, so you still had English, or just append at the end if they didn't mind not setting it as the default. And then after it's actually updated the variable, the XML variable, it goes ahead and writes that as the config file in that folder. So let's see here if I can demo that. Okay, so let's find installers. I'm going to go ahead and run this so you can see it actually building the script. And then so we do 365. And then we got our dash. We're going to say Project Pro. We are going to say channel. We're going to do monthly enterprise. We are going to do company value of AZ Smug. We're going to do language of French, and we are going to tell it to just build the XML only. And if demos were working, this will go ahead and create that on my local machine in that folder. So let's see here as I pull that up. Okay. All right, so it created that folder for me and it created the XML file. You can see the timestamp here is just a minute ago. And then we'll edit it and make sure that it actually did what I wanted. Okay, so let's compare this now to, oh, I got an invalid channel name. Broad is not valid. So the channel names are causing me issue. I got to fix that, and that'll be fixed tonight. So it did set the channel to semi-annual. It was supposed to switch it to broad, which is why I got an error there. It has the O365 retail. It's got the language ENUS as default, but it added the French language. So when you install it, it will have the French as an optional. It did put the project like I asked, and it went through, and it also added the French language to project for me. So that's wonderful. It set the company value to AZ Smug, and it also added this remove section of project standard. So even though I don't have project standard installed, it's not going to hurt anything by having that line. But if I did, it would go ahead and remove project standard when it was installing Project Pro. So this is I added this functionality so I could quickly determine if my XML was correct and was doing what I wanted it to do, instead of running a full install and then seeing what happened. So hopefully you will find this useful. And also, if you're doing anything with XML in any other of your projects, this will be a great script for you to look through to get ideas on how to modify XML. It took me a while to figure out how to build all this on the fly and to manipulate XML, to add new XML objects, remove XML objects. And so now when I'm working on other things that have to do with XML, I often reference this script to help me out when I'm figuring that out. So then once it's built that XML file, it goes through and on a normal install, and it's running in the cache, it's running that setup exe with the argument list configure, and then it's calling that XML file that we just built. And then it's capturing the return code. At this point, in our environment, we have that toast notification, which is looking for a registry key. So we're just going ahead and setting that registry key to false so that the toast would no longer display after Office is installed. There's no point in users being notified at that point, but I'm not going to try to steal any more Mike's thunder on that. And then after the install, we go ahead and once again tell it to trigger hardware inventory so that it shows up in CM. In my lab, this works great using the Office, using this here section of CM that they've added. It goes through here, shows me all this beautiful data, and when I trigger those different commands right after install, it shows up here instantly with which version is running, and then which the channels that it's running. Monthly, look at that, monthly enterprise, they got that in there already. So very cool. Yeah, so kudos to the config manager team for this stuff. It is really cool for figuring out what's going on. And then we found that because of the user experience that we're trying to offer with having it do the pop-up if they have like Word and Office open, that it will give a specific error. I capture that and spit that back out to the log as well, just because I want to know why it failed. Let's. Oh, you know what? I bet I don't have any old Office versions. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna demo that, but I don't have many machines that have Office 2016, so I can't. But so the scenario where this happens is if like you have Office open, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and you go to install Office 365, it actually pauses your installation and prompts you to either click continue, which will close the apps for you, or click cancel. If you click cancel, it comes back as a failure, and this is the return code that is returned if a user clicks cancel. So we're just capturing that data because we really like data. If Office 2016 was installed previously versus doing like a clean install or a net new install, in the Microsoft documentation, it says that Office 365 is not like fully installed if you removed an MSI version previously. So what I'm doing is just if the Office installs successfully, I'm actually exiting with an exit code of 3010, specifying that the machine needs to do a reboot for it to fully finish. Otherwise, it will exit normal, which will be an exit code 0. Or if we're unlucky and it has some kind of error code, it will pump out the error code at that time. And now we're down to line 600, and it's all crystal clear, right? All right. And let's see what's next on our deployments. Did we want to pause for any questions, or do we want to just keep chugging along?
Let's keep chugging because we got 30 minutes left.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess I could talk pretty well. I believe you're up, Mike.
Yep. Okay, let's flip back here. All right, so that was the install script. If you guys are still with us. So we're gonna just do, I'm gonna kind of tie these last two in together. So we've got what the deployments look like, because the deployments are kind of key to the whole thing, especially in terms of the user experience. Like when we initially set this up, we wanted to make sure this was kind of idiot proof, basically. We wanted to make it, it does a lot of the heavy lifting, but in terms of targeting goes, we want to make sure that it's super simple. So we want to be able to support user and user group deployments. So even if that's just adding people to an AD group, so that they can participate in the self-service, that's easy. Or if they want to do traditional device-based deployments, that's a possibility as well. So we'll get in and talk about the deployments, and then we're all about the user experience, right? And you've seen this toast notification a couple of times, and there was a question in the chat earlier about which one we're using, and I'm pretty sure we based this off of Trevor's SMS agents code that we borrowed from him, and we've kind of made our own off of it. That's what we're using. So we'll get into how that lights up, because the communications team, they thought this was a great idea they love what we do for Windows 10 in-place upgrades, and they wanted to be able to do the same thing for the Office deployment. And we're like, well, we have a very unique setup at work in terms of there's a kind of a 2-key system in place that we call SCAPE. I forget what the acronym stands for, but basically, if we have a deployment, it ends up getting pushed out until there's an approval process. And the way that we do WAS and everything else, that just doesn't work with this particular model. So like in our WAS process, the automation framework, when they schedule devices, that actually handles the machines, and it kind of bypasses that scape. There's still the approval process part, but in terms of config manager goes, that's how that's handled. So we figured by doing just having users added to AD groups, they wouldn't necessarily need to go through the escape process, and they could have the approval process would be on basically the group membership ad versus on the config manager side. But they came to us, they said, hey, can you do this for Office 365? And we're like, yes and no. So we wanted to accommodate it because it is slick. We are trying to drive up participation. And actually, Gary, I was just thinking about this, is we'll probably need to find a simple way that we can stamp it so that we can collect our metrics on users that do self-service, so that we can turn around and say, no, actually, people do participate in self-service when it's got a nice presentation to it. So, so with that, let me jump into some demonstrations. So, going back to the content now, I think in my lab here, I've created. Oh wait, I gotta hide those from Brian. I've got these different user collections. So we're mainly focusing on the user targeting model right now, right? So our main one is going to be this particular one for upgrading Office. I just have my standard user in here right now. User. If you don't test with how you're going to deploy to users, it'll often turn around to bite you, especially in an environment like ours. Because if you're always testing elevated, that can have some dire consequences when you turn it loose in the real world. So if we look at this, I've got basically 3 deployments targeted here. So I've got the content app, I've got the actual semi-annual enterprise channel app, and I also have this baseline here. So these are the 3 components that kind of tie this all together. So this is going to be like Star Wars Episode 3, where Anakin turns into Darth Vader, right? Hopefully it pulls it all together for everybody. Now, the way these deployments are set up, you're going to be like, well, wait a minute, I thought you said that this was an available deployment to the end user. Well, right here, you hang on, Harjeet, let me, you asked for this earlier. You said, well, hang on, this is actually set to required. I thought you said it was available, right? So there was a question that came up about the pre-deploy stuff, and you can pre-deploy to a user's primary device, but only on a required deployment, which I think we have a user voice out there we found one that says, hey, make this available to, or make it so that we can pre-deploy on available deployments as well as required deployments. And then I think one of our Weisenheimer colleagues said, oh, we'll just do it this way. And it's like, well, yeah, no, that doesn't work. So we figured out that we needed to do a little sorcery or wizardry with the actual deployment itself, because of the fact that feature is not available to us until you guys get out and vote up these user voices. I've been watching Twitter. You guys are retweeting those. Good. Go vote for them as well. Feel free to pester Rob York as much as you want. And then the last one here is the baseline. So this is actually controls that. So I'll kind of talk about that in a second. Now let's look at this actual deployment itself and how it's structured. So this one is just the content, and I haven't set this one up yet. Like I said, I was just resetting this lab again the other night for this meeting. But typically, like in our production environment, we have this going to basically all those collections because it's the dependency for everything. So we don't care if you're in, whatever collection you're in. We want to make sure that that content gets saturated and targeted. So you'll see more of them in here when in a production environment. Now, if we look at this, the deployment settings for this are just install and required. This doesn't really install anything, right? Like Gary went over it's that pre-cache portion of the script, right? It's just it basically makes that hard link into the program data and sets that content up so that it's ready to go. That's really all this is doing. It's just getting that payload out there. So if this is targeted to a user, we do have restrictions on this on the application that it's only will run on Win 10 machines, because I'm pretty sure Brian would kill us if all of a sudden we start caching this on servers. Well, we don't log on with the same IDs on servers anyway, but you get the point. Like you wouldn't want to just spread it anywhere. From a peer-to-peer model, think of this as a kind of saturating your content throughout the environment too. So the more people that get it, they'll be caching it, and it'll be available for peer-to-peer. So that works out well also. Scheduling, typically, you make it available right away, because as soon as that user or that device sees this policy, bam, you want it to start caching that content, right? So we want that to kind of happen, and that way, anything newly gets added, then that's good. Now, if we look at the semi-annual enterprise channel deployment, it's targeted this particular same collection, and this is unique in one of two ways. I think one of them was like, well, that's just easy, but have it in order to do a gated process. So meaning that a user has to be targeted with the content first, and then it would have to go into a different collection to get targeted for the actual deployment. We thought about that, right? Because our whole WAS process is gated. But we wanted to try to keep this inside a configuration manager without any external SMA dependencies or things like that. And the problem here is, if these deployments have already happened in the past, if I take and I drop Gary's account in, right, and he's on a machine, and this is available, well, what? He's going to get a notification, hey, Gary, Office is available to you. And he goes, oh, hey, great, I want Office, because he lives on he likes the newer stuff, so he's going to go click install, and then he's going to sit and wait for 4 hours, or depending upon the VPN connection, to get the install, which is not a good user experience at all. And one of our user voices that we submitted was, well, have it so that it doesn't light up in Software Center so it kind of goes hand in hand with our ability to pre-deploy content on available deployments. Is the other part of that is also, don't show it in Software Center if that flag is set and the content's already cached, because you're just gonna have the same thing, right? I think it's I definitely think it's something that the CM team needs to address from a user standpoint. I think hopefully more of the Microsofties are seeing that, not everybody's connected via fiber, and things can be slow, especially when you're on slow links or hotspots and things like that. So that's kind of the downside, is like, well, we want to make it stupid simple so that I can just add Gary to a group and he will get this awesome experience, right, without it showing up until it's ready to go. Now, the deployment here is you're going, well, hey, wait a minute, this is not available. You're forcing a required deployment down on him. Well, yes and no, right? That's what the policy says, but we do some controlling of that policy, and I will clearly state that what we do is not necessarily supported, but we look for a couple of things, and then we flip the policy.
Can you show the user experience tab?
Yes, user experience tab. Oh yeah, perfect. So you're like, well, wait a minute. How is it showing up in Software Center if you're hiding it in Software Center and all notifications? Well, remember, I probably shouldn't pick on Gary. I should probably pick on Brian. We don't want to show it to Brian until it's ready to go, because he's going to get very cranky if he clicks it and he has to sit and wait for the download, right? So we hide it at first, and this is required, so it's not going to start, right, until it's got the other dependency going. So that's the deployment. Now, what else do we want to look at first? The baseline. All right, so let's shift over and look at the baseline, or I should say the CIs. This was lessons learned point number 2, right? So you might notice that I have 2 of them here. I have one that's prereqs and 2 that's launch. And if you look here, Harjeet, if you look right here in the user setting column, right, you'll notice that one of them is no and one of them is yes. The toast notification needs to run a user context in order for the user to actually be able to see it, right? The sorcery that we do in this one here actually requires elevated privileges. Now, there's lots of caveats with these that we found out in running through this various scenarios. We're trying to do 2 settings within the same CI. That didn't work so well, so we split them out, and we're like, well, maybe we can control the order that they process in if we have 2 different CIs, and if we make them alphabetically, in the order we want them to run in. And I think it still runs at a random thing. The other thing to note too is that it seemed to go through and actually process all the discovery scripts, and then go through and process all the remediation scripts, which wasn't the way that we wanted it to work either, because we ended up setting a registry key to enable the user to be able to see the content. And I came up with a matrix that it's got like 12 or 14 different cases that basically determine, hey, is the content cached? Is Office already installed? Is it visible in Software Center? And is the registry key already set? Right. So between those 4 items, we have all these different use cases, and then the action determines what it should do based on that. So that's what the heavy lifting does. The toast notification, the number 2, the launch, it just basically looks at that registry key, because we write it in a location that a regular user can read from. And if it's set to true, it says, hey, I'm good to go, boys. Let me light that thing up. And so it lights up. So those fold into a baseline that's also targeted to that same collection. I think we're running it once a day right now. So there could be a little bit of lag between when your actual toast notification fires. Now you probably want to see what these look like, because these are actually pretty good scripts also. Let's see here. So, and what I'm going to do is, instead of having to use Zoom it, we're going to put this here. And let me close this out and crank this up so old guys can see it. So what you can see here is we're looking for, we want to look for a couple of things. So we wanted to make sure that the content was 100% cached. That's kind of the trigger that we're using to say, hey, green light, let's do this next phase of the thing, right? So You can see that we're just using a generic software distribution O365 registry key, and that's where we write a couple of things in there. Gary showed that in the install script, because at the end of the install script we set it to false, because we don't want a toast notification popping after somebody's already installed it. We've got it being logged, and so this one runs as admin, so this is going to be in Windows temp. We have the user one going into the user's temp directory also, because when things don't run so well, it's nice to have logging and be able to understand why it happened and why it didn't happen. So some of the magic that we're looking at is, and this took like a couple days of effort, and I have to say that a good Microsoft friend gave us some great advice on how we could actually retrieve, do a match between the application and the cached content, which actually happens to be this nice little class right here. We had kind of reverse engineered some of it, and we were jumping through like 3 or 4 different classes to get it. But we found out that we were able to reduce it down into like just a few lines, which was great. And this will come back if cache complete is true, and it'll set it to true. So if cache complete is true, set it to true.
The problem that we found was with inside the policy, if it was a user targeted policy, it would not show up when system was looking for it. But when we wrote the scripts, we were just using elevated accounts, and all that policy was showing up. So when it ran as system in the CI, it would always return that it was not in the cache because it didn't read those policies properly, which then set us back to have, and we then found this method where system actually did see the right policies.
Excuse me, let me close my door. I have little ones at home too.
Right. So as Mike was saying earlier too, just the importance of running through your tests and running them the way that you're going to deploying them. So how we ended up finding that is we have a in our software center we have a program that we can run that launches the command prompt as system, and then we can run our scripts and test that way, and that's how we determine that those different policies don't show up for system, but they do show up in a user context. So being able to have the abilities to test as the way that you're deploying is crucial.
Yep. So we have another check to see if this is already installed, and yeah, just a quick thing to keep in mind that this product name will be changing, which is something that we need to remember.
We already accounted for it.
Oh yeah, we did. That's right. Okay. So that's going to be changing in new installs past, I forget what build it is. We get the toast notification value. We check to see if the user policy or machine policy. So we just added functionality for machines as well. So basically, we're digging into the local policy that has been set on the client, right? In what's actual config. So this is digging deep into the land of WMI here. And what we do is we do a little trick similar to how we do our task sequence deployments for in-place upgrades. Is we have our notifications off by default because we don't want you to walk into a branch and then all of a sudden you see this lovely task sequence notification on top of today's mortgage rates, and then somebody snaps a picture. Yeah, that wouldn't be a good thing. So we have them off by default. And here we found that we could kind of leverage the same thing. It's like, well, the policy is local. The policy has a flag that says whether it should be displayed in Software Center or not, which is actually happens to be this user UI experience. So we flip it from false to true. And lo and behold, it shows up in Software Center. Also, you will see deadline deployment. Seeing it here. And we flip that too to where we clear it out. So the deployment's gone, the required deadline is gone. So it basically flips it from a required deployment with a deadline to no deployment deadline. Oh, and another thing you might be asking is, let me cancel this real quick, and this is probably something I didn't show, was, well, how do you keep it from running right away? Since it's a required deployment to the user. Ah, shoot. Yeah, I forget, this screen is not system modal. You gotta kill I think gotta kill that one. There. Had to kill that one before it let me go out here. So so if we look at this deployment again to the user, this required deployment, I should say, it's probably something even Harjeet didn't pick up on because I didn't zoom it, was the deadline. We bump it out five years, basically, right? So it can have that required deployment. It can get everything ready, but it's not actually going to install Office at the time that user's dropped into the collection. Of course, unless it's past 2025, but we're probably going to be on, I don't know what Office is going to be called by then. They'll probably rename it back from Microsoft 365 back to Office again come 2025.
Amazon Office.
Yeah, so so that's how that particular item is controlled. And then we do have, I know we're running short on time, so I do want to fire up a demo really quickly. But here's all the different use cases that we can get into that we figured out, like, you know, if it's cached, if the registry key set, if this, if that, what do we do in all these cases? And we log it all, so it's nice because we can see, oh, yeah, the cache wasn't complete on that one yet. That's why it didn't set it. That kind of thing. So that's the discovery script for that. Let me just flip over to this guy here.
Quick note, it's the discovery and remediation script, and that goes back to that weird timing issue when you, with how CIs and baselines run the order of operation. So we ended up having to merge the remediation into the discovery to try to make sure that it actually remediated before it would kick off the other one. Because what we found is, as Mike said earlier, it will actually run through every single discovery and then loop back and start going through each remediation. It doesn't do discovery remediation in that order. So those are things that we didn't realize before we started down this process and had to accommodate as we went and found those issues.
All right, so I've just logged on. I've reverted this back, so I've never logged on with this user before. Oh wait, maybe I have. Shoot, where did I take my snapshot? Okay. Oops. We'll see if it works. Maybe the demo gods will be with us here. It shouldn't show up. Maybe it's what happens when you get going. Okay, so I don't see it in here yet because I don't think it's been fully cached, which it shouldn't be. So, and mine's very sparse because most of these are package programs in here. They're driver packages that I like to do pre-caching tests with. So that's another one of our user voice annoyances. So we should see that pop in. We'll give that just a couple of minutes here, and then I will come back to that. So going back over here, or I had it up, is cancel this one, and let's see what the other one looks like. So this is actual launch. We've made this kind of modular as well, and like I said, I think SMS agent is where we originally borrowed this, but basically you can do some cool things. Okay, so this is the discovery script, which is just basically going to check to see, hey, can I actually launch, right? So let me just pop another tab here. So can I actually launch, right? And regular user has rights to read this key, so it's going to read the value, and then we do some logging and see if it's true. And if it's true, then we say we're going to launch it. If it's not true, we do nothing, basically. So that's was really our only way of getting around blending an admin CI with a user CI is we had to kind of have that intermediary stopgap measure to be able to, hey, where's a place that this guy can read, because he can't read into WMI like where we were previously looking. And then what we have here is the remediation script. So this would be very similar to any of the toast notification examples that you've seen online that you can download and customize yourself. And what this looks like is this. So you can actually embed you can do some base 64 encoding of your image and your logo. There's tools that you can stick an image in and it'll spit out this base 64 blob, and then it reads it in. Interestingly enough, it doesn't take ampersands in here. I put that in there, and it was failing, and I'm like, why is it failing? And then, so this is where you put your company name, or you could put a company name, you could put Microsoft 365, whatever. And then this is your Software Center shortcut link. So if you want to be able to deep link to it, if you want a learn more button, I just have that going out to the Microsoft docs. And any custom text that you want to display. So basically, if I run back over here, see if this is done yet. Now, like I said, this does take a little bit of time here for the CI to process. And since we can't really control the order that they run in, we like the prereqs to run before the launch, but that's not always the case. And we can run it like it's going to run on whatever schedule you tell Configuration Manager to run it on. And I don't know if this one actually, yeah. So
you should trigger the app enforce too to make sure it's downloaded your cache.
Oh yeah. Let me trigger that really quickly. Good call, Gary. That's why I keep this guy around. Yeah, so the app enforce, like if you make any changes to the content, we're going to look for like specific versions of that content. And actually, this guy does have rights to look in program data, which is nice. We can see that it's not configured here yet. So CM should see that, should say, hey, missed this required deadline. And this should pull in. Since it's all land-based, it should happen relatively quickly. But if we wanted to look at something here, we could look at temp%. So this is a user's temp. And shoot, I didn't launch CM Trace yet. 1 second on that. Because I won't pain you guys into Wally's world. So we see that, hey, it's compliant, nothing to do. It goes back to sleep, right? Because it's not cached yet, basically. And then the other log, when it runs, is going to be in Windows temp, the one that runs under system context here. Yes, since I'm not an admin. And here's the baseline. Oh, you know what? Did I not revert this machine? I think I failed to revert the machine yesterday, Gary.
It would still have that, though, from the time you triggered it just now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I must have reverted it. Okay.
So, see, it's not finding the content in the cache, which is why it's not popping.
Yep, so it did a match between what our name was and found what the content ID was, and then what this content ID should relate to that random character in the CCM cache. It says it's not found, so I'm not going to light up the toast notification. In fact, if it was set, if the registry key was set, we would flip it back to false in case something changed, like maybe the content got bumped between month 1 and month 2. If it's visible in Software Center, so it's not visible in Software Center right now, and what the GUID is for the user that it found it under, and what our compliance case was. So I know we're 1 minute after. Greg, is it okay to keep going just for a couple minutes, or?
Yeah, that's fine. That's
okay.
fine.
Yeah. So But let's see if we can get this thing in here. And then, okay, so here, it's cached now. So you see it made it in the cache. And now if I just give this baseline a friendly bump again, evaluate.
Open your software center. Okay.
Okay. So it set it to true. So this is an example of where it ran the launch before it ran the prereqs, which is very annoying that we can't control the order that the CIs run in. We should put a user voice out there for that too.
Yeah. But it should show in your software center now.
Yeah. Yeah, like Gary said, it should show up here. So here, it shows up now, right? And guess what? There's no required deadline on here anymore. So now it shows up as an available deployment. So if I were to go ahead and click on this now, it would go ahead and run. But really what we want is, light it up. End user doesn't know it's there. We haven't lit up any notifications here. We like the toast notification. So we'll just bump this one more time real quick. And if this all comes together, takes a few minutes, bam, we got our toast notification here. We can hit our get started button. This should launch Software Center. Takes us right to that app, and I should be able to click install. And
one thing to note though is if you make a change on the policy on the server side, and the next time it does an update, it could reset these, or it will reset what you've changed with the CI. So if you change the required deadline date out like an extra year, when the machine gets the new policy, it's going to reset because it's going to override the new policy from the server. It's going to see the version change and pull down the new policy.
Yep, absolutely. So with that, I think we're out of time by 3 minutes, but hopefully we didn't go through this too quickly. We're going to continue to document it, and Gary will probably write 10 blogs to one of my blogs, and we'll make this available to people to steal, borrow, recycle, whatever. But we think that this leads a pretty good experience. It meets all of our goals that we originally set out to meet. There was a question, can we use this deployment in OSD? Absolutely. I've actually even done a TS bootstrap from CCM setup and installed this, which is awesome. I'll probably write a blog on that maybe this weekend, or no commitments. And so yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed this presentation and this our Office experience, or our Microsoft 365 experience. So with that, let me turn it back over to you, Greg.